7 was the prophet's, one of the descriptions of the destruction coming on Jerusalem. Chapter 8, he finds himself sitting in exile with, oh, you want to get the lights?
With the elders of the exiled Jews sitting in front of him in his house, and he goes into a visionary state, and God reaches out, picks him up by the hair, takes him over in the vision, and sets him down at the north door of the temple in Jerusalem. Let's see here. Yeah. There you go. That picks it up at verse 7. He brought me to the entrance of the court, the northern door. I think I've got remember last week? He set him down right there. That's the idol that provokes jealousy. This is the holy place, almost holy place. That's the holy place. That's the entrance, or the portico, if you please. That's the altar of burnt offering. And that's a representation of the sun because the temple faces east. And I think we got to verse 11, where we have found 70 elders in verse 11 of the house of Israel, with Jezaniah the son of Shaphan standing among them, each with his censer in his hand, and the fragrance of a cloud of incense rising. These men, Ezekiel goes from there over to here, and we see this wall lined with compartments, individual compartments, probably one for each man. Each wall on the inside, kind of a private, secret shrine, is filled with a wall full of pictures of animals which they are burning the incense to in verse 11. And notice that it was not the common people or the poor or the ignorant who were guilty of the idolatry. It started, or at least in this case, at the top, at these leaders, leading men of the nations who had all of the power and the influence on all of the people, so they were just as guilty as anyone else, probably more. What is a censer? It's a small flat pan. You put the incense on it, ashes first, and then incense, and then the clouds rise. Hello, John Mark. And whose right was it to burn incense inside the temple grounds? Priests only. These men were not priests. So that was one violation of the law right there. So they were usurping or taking what was not their right by burning incense, and you can just see them each in his own compartment going in and the smoke rising up in worship or adoration to all of these animal figures on the walls. Verse 12, then he said to me, Son of man, he being God, of course, do you see what the elders of the house of Israel are committing in the dark, each man in the room of his carved image? For they say, quote, the Lord does not see us. Why? Because the Lord has forsaken the land. That is, he doesn't know we're in here. He doesn't know what we're doing. And he said to me, yet you will see still greater abominations which they are committing. In verse 12, when he asked Ezekiel, he asked him, have you taken this in? Have you really looked at this and considered the religious implications of this and what it would mean to me as the God of Israel? Has this shaken you at all? He is told to hang on because there's more coming which is going to be worse than this. Questions? I'm doing such a great job. No questions. Oh, okay. I've got this idol of jealousy, the hole in the wall. Okay, I don't want to go too far because that's getting ahead of it. When I read that, I thought about this verse in Romans 1. This was a description of the Gentiles of Paul's day. He says, they professed to be wise and they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures, which is exactly what was painted on these walls of these individuals, of these men, of these 25 men. Verse 14, and he, God, brought me to the entrance of the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north. And behold, women were sitting there weeping for Tammuz. He said to me, do you see this, Son of Man? Yet you will still see greater abominations than these. Let's see. Okay, that last arrow right there is supposedly a representation of the women weeping over this mythical god called Tammuz or Adonis in other places. He was a fertility god. Surprise, surprise. He was a Babylonian god whose supposed death each summer caused the vegetation to wilt and die. And we've seen that happen. It happens. In the spring, though, he returns from the underworld and brings rain and new growth to cause everything to come back like it was supposed to be. And his worship involved fertility rituals. His revival in the spring was because of the wailing of the idol god Ishtar, I think was his wife. So this tells you about what time of the year this is, because the women, when the spring comes, they celebrate. They have a big bash when Tammuz comes back to life. But in September, perhaps, they are weeping because they see the vegetation wilting and dying, and they weep over this god, Tammuz, because he is seen in their religious ideals as dying. But next spring he will undergo a resurrection and come back, and then the next fall they will weep over this god's death, and the cycle just goes on and on and on. But of course, I mentioned its connection with the fertility rites, and that fits the situation very good. Okay, in verse 15, let me see if I keep getting back to verse 15. Whoops, got to go back. I need to figure out a better way to do that. He said to me, do you see this, Son of Man? Yet you will see greater abominations than these. Now, the abominations themselves aren't necessarily that much greater because they're all gross violations of the temple grounds anyway. But it concerns the location within the temple and the people who are involved in the abominations. In other words, the persons who are committing these things. And things are not going to get better, Ezekiel. They're going to get worse. And we'll get to verse 16. Then he brought me, I don't know if he picked him up by the hair again or not, but my head's hurting. Then he brought me to the inner court of the Lord's house. That's through that door where the women were weeping in the north, that north door. And behold, at the entrance of the temple of the Lord, between the porch or the vestibule I showed you, this is where we are now. Okay? Between the porch and the altar were about 25 men with their backs to the temple of the Lord.
Is that all those dots?
I'm sorry?
Is that all those dots, like between there and the altar? That's 20.
This is the men. This represents the men. That's
Right.
the altar and that's the porch.
Right, that's, right,
Does that help you?
okay. Yeah, I thought that's what,
Okay, well, those dots represent the 25 men. Let's see, with their backs toward the, verse 16, with their backs to the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east. And what was toward the east? The sun. They were worshiping the sun. Now, planet worship is nothing new. Worshiping the host of heaven is condemned all the way through the Old Testament, and this is one example of it. Their faces toward the east, and they were prostrating themselves eastward toward the sun. Verse 17, he said to me, "Do you see this, Son of Man? Is it too light a thing for the house of Judah to commit the abominations which they have committed here, that they have filled," here's another charge, "they have filled the land with violence and provoked me repeatedly? Is it enough with all of these religious abuses in my house, the temple?" But the violence here refers to the injustice and mistreatment of the widows, orphans, and the less fortunate. And even later we'll learn of the murder of many people who were less fortunate. For behold, in verse 17, they are putting the twig to their nose. Therefore, I will deal, indeed, I will deal in wrath. My eye will have no pity, nor will I spare. And though they cry in my ears with a loud voice, I will not listen to them. So the abomination is greater because right now it's at the front of the holy place. Probably not 2 steps from the entrance to the holy place where the altar of incense was and the showbread and so on and so forth was located in the holy place. These 25 men were probably priests, and that's a big probably. There were 3 or 4 horses of priests and a high priest, so that's how you can come up with that, but we're not sure. They probably represent the entire priesthood, as those 70 elders who are in these cubicles, these rooms, represent the common folks. Verse 17, twig to their nose. First of all, I have no idea what that means. Even after looking and looking and looking, I could not find it, but I do have Adam Clark's statement on it. How did the Lord take it? It's an insult. Okay? I love Adam Clark's statement on this. There are many strange and some filthy interpretations given of this clause, but the former are not worth repeating, and I abominate the latter too much to submit to defile my paper with them. That's strong. They think it's some, I'm not going to give you the modern equivalent in a church building, but somebody that passes you on the interstate who's upset with you. Okay? And God took it that way. But no matter how much investigation I did, I could not find what that particular insult means. I'm sure Ezekiel and the exiles knew exactly what it meant. I'm sure they knew exactly what it meant. But the Lord was full of power when he saw them do that. Any questions on chapter 8? that's the altar. That's the 25 men worshiping the sun. The most holy place. And the holy place. I think that's got everything. I did this to make sure that we had some idea of where Ezekiel was, so that you would have a better understanding of what he was dealing with. Okay, the porch, or the vestibule. Chapter 9, judgment on Jerusalem and the departure of the glory of God. Now, chapter 8 and chapter 7 give you plenty of reasons why God has decided to leave his home, because it has been so corrupted and defiled that it is no longer fit to be his place of habitation. So he's going to pack his bags, so to speak, and he's going to leave. And then he's going to take care of the business that he's been threatening all along after that. Chapter 9, verse 1. Then he cried, that's God again, cried out in my hearing with a loud voice, saying, draw near, O executioners. Some translations have guards. Some have those who have charge over the city. Some versions have you who are going to punish the city. Mine obviously has executioners, each with his destroying weapon in his hand. Behold, 6 men came from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north. That was the gate where Ezekiel, in the vision, went inside the temple where the idol of jealousy was located, just outside that gate, just north of that gate. Each with his shattering weapon in his hand, and among them there was a certain man clothed in linen, with a writing case at his loins or at his waist. And they went in and stood beside the bronze altar. I showed you where the bronze altar was, right in front of the portico of the porch. It was between it and the gate where the sacrifices were offered. So these men are appointed to take care of God's business, and they are a representation of what group of people? The Chaldean army, the Babylonian army. They are the one who's going to carry out the slaughter. So that's who they're seen as representing. A certain man clothed in linen in verse 2, he's some sort of a prince or a leader. Some think he's of the priestly class. God didn't tell Ezekiel exactly what office he held. But I think it's pretty clear that these 7 men are all God's angels who are here to carry out whatever God commands them to do. Now, with a writing case in verse 2, it's an ink horn. And it was attached to a case for carrying reed pens. Case probably about that long, and on one end of it was an ink horn or an ink well with a lid over it. And it was this ink well attached to this case that made it easy to slip it through the belt, or the girdle, if you please, that held the robe together. And that was the dress that was universally recognized at that time as being that of a secretary or scribe. Remember, Jeremiah had one, I believe, was his scribe who wrote down all of his prophecies. And believe it or not, that image is still over there today the same. Recognized with the inkhorn and the little case with the reed pens in it. Carrying in the belt is still recognized in the East today as the same office of this man, a scribe or a secretary. Okay, so we've got 6 men and then 1 man in charge with something to write with. Then the glory of the Lord, by the way, the Jews use the word Shekinah for this glory of the Lord. It's not found in the Bible, but that's the word that they have applied to it. Shekinah. Then the glory of the Lord, of the God of Israel, went up from the cherub. Remember the cherubs are the chariot of the Lord with the huge platform on the top and the 4 cherubs under it with the wheels spinning. And on top of that platform is a throne, and we all know who is sitting on that throne. So, the God of Israel, he got up out of his chariot, off his chariot, on which it had been, and he went to the threshold, to the porch of the temple. And he called to the man clothed in linen, at whose loins was the writing case. The Lord said to him, quote, "Go through the midst of the city, even through the midst of Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over all of the abominations which are being committed in its midst. But to the others he said in my hearing, the 6th, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go through the city after the man carrying the inkhorn who's doing the marking. Wait till he gets through with his job. And then all that he doesn't mark, strike. And do not let your eye have pity, and do not spare. Remember, we're still in the vision. He picked him up by the hair, took him to Jerusalem in vision, and that's where we still are. So don't lose me. Now the glory of the Lord in verse 3, where it says he went up from the cherub, he had been there since chapter 8 and verse 4, apparently. So that's where we last see him located by the northern gate. Gets off the chariot. He rides on and goes to the threshold of the temple as if he's going to direct the actions of these 7 men personally at the door for the entrance to the most holy place. Yes. He is instructed, these 7 men, 6 men are instructed that anyone who does not have the mark of the man with the scribe, the man with the inkhorn, are to be killed. And let's go ahead and go to verse 6 and I'll back up to that. The words, the command to these 6 men continues. Utterly slay old men, young men, maidens, little children, and women. But do not touch any man on whom is the mark. We don't know what the mark was. It's never identified.
It was an X.
An X?
Yes.
A tall?
Final letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And it's a tall, T-A-W.
Okay, I think that's a guess.
It's a notation.
Okay,
And it's
okay.
a cross.
Okay,
So they got it.
yes. And start from my sanctuary. What has he been doing around the sanctuary for the last chapter or 2? Pointing out to Ezekiel the abominations that have been going on there. So that's where we're going to start. He said to them, defile the temple, my home, and fill the courts with the slain that you are about to carry out. Go out, he says, get going. Thus they went out and struck down the people in the city. As they were striking the people, and I alone was left. I fell on my face and cried out, saying, Alas, Lord God, are you destroying the whole remnant of Israel by pouring out your wrath on Jerusalem? And if you loved your people, that would be a natural reaction to seeing, and even though it's in a vision, what these 6 men were doing. going back to verse 6, utterly slay old men, young men, maidens, little children, women, but not those with the mark. I'll call it indiscriminate slaughter that's mentioned in verse 6 is exactly the kind of indiscriminate slaughter that Babylonians carried out when they broke down the walls of Jerusalem.
How would little children be able to grieve over detestable things?
How would what?
Little children be able to grieve over the detestable things that were going on?
They wouldn't.
Well,
He says, I'll spare any of those who are grieving over what's going on.
right.
Oh, and you're saying they can't grieve.
Yeah.
Okay.
they don't-
We're not assigning any guilt to these little children.
I don't-
Okay? And we read into this in Revelation. Remember the very same, the marking and who gets killed. And here's an important, an important truth that I think I mentioned when we were in Revelation a few months back, that all suffering is not punishment. All suffering is not punishment. The faithful weren't punished even though they suffered. We talk about the remnant. Did they suffer? Yes, they did. But not because God was punishing them. They were there in the midst of a terrible situation, and like everybody else, they paid the price. Many of them did. The real promise and assurance behind the picture is that the invasion of this Babylonian army, who are to slaughter everything that's breathing, is not punishment on the righteous. It's just something that happens. Did you? Yes, sir.
Yeah, all I was going to point out, there was a question about the children and the women, the kids that would not be, more or less held accountable at this day and age. But remember when Achan did his sin against the treasury, him and his whole family were put to death.
They were.
Nathan and all the elders, the 250 people there, whenever the earth opened up, it took them, their tents, and their families, and all of them went down.
Yes. And Korah's
I think
family.
that's what this is.
Korah's family that rebelled against Moses.
Yes, yes.
He and his entire family, young and old, paid the price for what Korah did. But it can't.
This idea survived on up till very recently. Does anyone remember the part of the United States Constitution that says there shall be no bill of attainder? Well, what a bill of attainder was meant that if a person committed certain felony, that all his offspring were deemed to have been tainted by the blood. And so oftentimes they couldn't hold any kind of office, that they couldn't do anything civilly, partly because of it. Here in the United States, when the country was being formed, the founding fathers saw fit not to
Louder.
to continue to use that idea, but all through English history, that was a fact of life.
Are you talking about guilt by association?
Guilt by
Relation. Okay. Guilt by relation. Okay. Okay. When you look at Ezekiel 21, this is a few chapters later. Tell the land of Israel, thus says the Lord, behold, I am against you. I will draw my sword out of its sheath and cut off from you the righteous and the wicked. Because I will cut off from you the righteous and the wicked, therefore my sword will go forth from its sheath against all flesh from south to north. Now the Babylonians couldn't tell the good guys from the bad guys. They slaughtered everybody. So many innocent people, children, died. but they were not being punished. They were just innocent victims. That's the only way I know how to explain it. The punishment was not directed at them, but we call that, what do you call it, collateral damage? And it happens all the time. Happens all the time. Start from my sanctuary. 1 Peter 4:17. For it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. And if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? Why does God start the sanctuary? What did these people have that other people didn't have?
They're supposed to have a relationship with God.
The privileges.
Yeah.
And especially the priests, whose job it was to teach people God's law. Yes, go ahead.
And the people closest to God, the priests, they should have known better.
Yes.
They were expected to know better.
Yes, they
They
were.
were trained to know better, and they had the greatest influence.
Yes. We've heard about they sinned against greater light than the people, common people out in the street. They had more information and more responsibility and more blessing, and abused that high privilege office. So God says, I'm going to start with you, because it was your responsibility to teach the people so that we don't have this kind of situation come up. They should have known much better than the others, but the privilege they had, as is so many times the case, and you read it in the paper, these greater privileges are abused. So start with my sanctuary. And Peter picks up on that very well. So, what does it say? They started with, verse 6, with the elders who were before the temple, the ones we've already seen. He says, go out there and get those men. Start with the people inside. Because that's the people we've been discussing, looking at, and he's been telling Ezekiel about these terrible abominations and asking him, do you see what's going on here? And of course, you've got to remember that Ezekiel's going to be hard-pressed to be convinced that his people deserve to be slaughtered wholesale. His Jewish brothers, slaughtered wholesale. Men, women, and children. So it's not easy to just say, oh, okay, I accept that and move on. You don't want to accept that. So he's hard to convince about what is about to happen. And that's, I think, that's why the Lord gave him this little tour. And then about the injustice, the way the poor and the needy and the widows and the orphans were being treated, and then the murders, which we will come up on a little bit later. Let's see, verse 7. God says, defile the temple. So he declares that he no longer acknowledges it as his, because he gives them the freedom to pollute his temple, which was already polluted. But I'm just going to turn it over for wholesale pollution. And what's going to pollute it? Defile the court, verse 7, and fill the courts with the slain. You remember, a dead body was considered unclean. In fact, everybody in a house where there had been a death were considered ritually unclean. So he's saying, just leave these corpses all over my house. Why? Because I am leaving. I am leaving. Here's the historical fulfillment. 2 Chronicles 36, also 1 Kings 24, 2 Kings 24 and 25. Therefore he brought up against them the king of the Chaldeans, who are the Babylonians, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and have no compassion on young man or virgin, old man or infirm. He, God, gave them all into his, Nebuchadnezzar's, hand, all the oracles of the house of God, great and small, and all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king and his officers, he brought them all to Babylon. In other words, he stripped it of anything valuable. Then they burned the house of the Lord and broke down the wall of Jerusalem and burned all of its fortified buildings with fire and destroyed all of its valuable articles. I mean, when Nebuchadnezzar came in there after being betrayed a couple of times, he says, I'm going to put an end to this. They deserved it, and he did. And he did.
What were those verses that you?
You can read about the 2 Kings 25, actually. 2 Kings, they correspond with 2 Chronicles. And in verse 8 he says, I alone was left. Oops, verse 8. Come on. And actually you think that's bad news, but when God's judgment falls, there's always some left. And he, at least he, is the one left. So we considered him a part of what group of people? The remnant. The remnant. That Ezekiel the prophet and all of those that man with the inkhorn was going out and putting the mark on. Those are the remnant. So that's, I don't like alone, but he says, at least I was left. So these destroyers had slain the 70 elders, the 25 sun worshippers, and the women who mourned over the god who was now dying, Tammuz, and they would celebrate with fertility rites the following spring. And that's where a good place to stop. Any questions, comments, gripes, complaints? Huh? All right. All right. All right, let's pray as we dismiss. Our Heavenly Father, help us to understand your judgments. We know that as we read, they seem harsh and unfair. But like Abraham, I always try to keep in mind, and let us keep in mind, shall not the judge of the earth always do right? And help us do right by you and by our fellow man, and help us continue to learn from your word. In Jesus' name, amen.